Hello and welcome to Dateline New Haven on WNHH-FM, New Haven's home for community radio. I'm Paul Bass, inviting you to look behind the headlines on the stories that make New Haven tick. We have pleasure today of a very special guest who makes New Haven and the world tick with her singing. She's an international operatic and concert soloist, mezzo-soprano Adriana Zabala. She's also professor of voice at Yale School of Music, and she has a new album out. And that's what we're going to talk about today. It's an interesting album. It's a new release called A Few Words About Chekhov. That is the music of the late composer Dominic Argento, who was a giant, quote-unquote, of American music and song, and a true lover of literature and story. And Adriana is going to tell us all about the new album, and we're going to listen to some parts of it too. Adriana, welcome to Dateline New Haven, and thanks so much for coming in.
Thank you so much for having me. It's wonderful to be here.
So it just came out, right?
Yes, in January.
And you brought a CD, which feels a little old school.
Right, doesn't it? To hand you an object feels a little old school. I do too. It feels good.
You know, I remember the transition to CDs, and that felt like, okay, it's smaller. It's not like when we went to the record stores and we had this big, lovely, drawing on the covers.
Yes.
But CDs were so much more convenient.
That's right.
And now we've gone to hyper convenience with streaming.
Yes.
But maybe we lost something. What do you think?
I do think we've lost something. The wonderful label, Bridge Records, on which this release is made, had a really lovely streaming distribution. And I've heard from friends and colleagues in other parts of the world and the country, and none of them have, for example, seen the cover art really. And,
I like the cover art.
And the program notes, which are important to the context of these works. So I do think we've lost something.
The cover art what is that of?
Italy?
Yes,
you got it. This is a view from a villa on Lake Como in northern Italy. It has very specific significance for Dominic Argento, as well as this was kind of the Easter egg. Maybe one soul, maybe on this earth, might discover this Easter egg and appreciate it. But I think there's something so resonant and special, even if one doesn't know, that there's a part of the text in the song cycle, A Few Words About Chekhov, where Chekhov is expressing to his wife, Olga, when I get well, we're going to travel together and do something really proper and beautiful, like go to Lake Como and set ourselves up properly. And the way Dominic sets that musically gives you all the dramatic irony you need. You can feel the pathos of realizing that they'll never make it there for that vacation.
You're making me cry already.
Me too. Me too. We are both crying. For those of you listening, those quivers in our voices we're having a human moment, which is beautiful. So thank you.
And is there something still worth imagining what's not going to happen? Is that part of what music is? What we imagine, the places we don't go?
I think that's exactly it. That photograph.
And I've been wondering whether when we do that with music or literature, and we imagine the places we're not going to go, this is going to sound a little woo-woo. Are we going there in a sense, a metaphysical sense, even if we're not physically going to Lake Como?
Paul, you and I speak the same language. Down to, my students will tell you, down to, this is going to sound a little woo-woo. So when you said that, I actually somehow knew precisely what you were going to say. And yes, I think the answer is yes. I do think we go there. I think that in all real ways, if our brains and our hearts and our souls are resonating with an idea that that sparks our humanity, our imagination, or our feelings, how can we say that's not real?
So you're helping us go there because you put out this new album, A Few Words About Chekhov. What is the album? Why did you do it? And what are the song cycles?
Why did I do it? Because many years ago, I was asked to prepare this song cycle for a song festival. I was already familiar with the music and with Dominic Argento himself. I was a fan of his writing as well as of his choices of poetry and literature. And so when I was asked to do it, I thought, wonderful. I don't know this cycle at all. Interesting that I've never heard of this cycle, because in the small niche world of classical singing, his cycles are very well known. So I thought, well, this will be interesting at the very least. What I was not prepared for was that this particular cycle slew me. I mean, I was just speechless, blown away, I guess is one way to look at it. But it was, so as I was learning it, I was just simultaneously discovering how ravishing and personal and intimate and beautiful and evocative. For me, every measure of the entire cycle.
And with his song cycle, he's bringing from past generations the work of Chekhov to a new generation in a new way, correct?
That's exactly
Which now you're
right.
doing again by performing
That's
this.
right. That's
And
exactly right.
we were going to start listening to it before we tell people more about it.
Yeah.
And you made an interesting suggestion that there are 3 song cycles for Chekhov, after which this is named. But you said, let's start off with what's added at the end, which are cabaret songs that Argento wrote later in his life in 2011.
So there's one little tweak to that, is that the title of the album is A Few Words About Chekhov. And I could say, for example, the
songs and cycles.
The meat and potatoes of the recording is that big old cycle.
Mm-hmm.
But the cabaret songs are the other cycles are not Chekhov. But the cabaret songs are very unique in Dominic's output. One is that it was the last thing he wrote for solo voice, for a composer who wrote for 60, 70 years for the solo voice, with a massive body of work and a widely recognized and recorded body of work. That's also what's unusual, is that these are recorded for the first time, and that's unusual for such a well-known composer.
Tell me about that. Why have they never been recorded?
You know, your guess is as good as mine, because no one did it before. So lucky us. And so the last cycle, the cabaret songs, are entirely unique in that he is writing what he described as Tin Pan Alley, pop, guileless, just plain as can be, true blue feelings of love. He had found love rather late in his life, very late, considering that he died in his 90s only a few years ago. He wrote these words. And for somebody who was a literary-minded man, and even though he had a spectacular sense of humor and was witty and loved a great pun, he was an intellectual man. One of the great delights of this last cycle is just how he takes everything and lays bare just this extremely human, again, guileless, simple idea. And so I'd love to start with this last thing.
And these are not Chekhov words.
These are not Chekhov.
These are his words.
These are Argento's words.
And this is Who Could Have Known.
This is Who Could Have Known.
Is that about falling in love?
It is indeed.
All right, let's hear it. Who Could Have Known? From Adriana Zabala's new CD, A Few Words About Chekhov, on Bridge Records here at WNHH FM.
Who could have known that we'd end up like this? Who knew that you would change my blues to bliss? Who could express all that you mean to me? Deeds pale, words fail to convey my love's immensity. During all those years we'd nod and grin, then go our ways apart. We used the language old friends speak in, till we learned the language of the heart when it sings. Who would have known I could start life anew? It's clear, my dear, now that you are here. It was you.
Who Could Have Known? Written by Dominic Argento, sung beautifully by Adriana Zabala on her new CD, A Few Words About Chekhov, Songs and Cycles of Dominic Argento. She was back there by J.J. Penna on the piano.
Yes.
And we're talking about that here in Dateline, New Haven. WNHH FM, New Haven, Connecticut. That was lovely. You know, at first
Thank you.
I was starting, I was thinking you're saying pop. I was thinking, is that almost like Cole Porter? And then you said guileless. There was no wordplay, no cleverness. It was sort of, you said it was this later in life surprise of falling in love.
Yes.
And it was very guileless.
Yes.
So how do you approach that as a singer? So you've had the rest of this album, you do operatic,
Right.
classical compositions.
Right.
Here you're doing cabaret style.
Yeah.
Obviously less instrumentation, just the piano, and the
Yes.
chords are so important, right? Those kind of,
The harmony.
diminished or seventh chords to just like
Exactly.
really make it happen.
Right.
What does that inform you to do as the singer?
I think it reminds anyone who approaches, especially a classical singer, a generally classical singer who approaches something a little bit less classical, is to really pay attention to the treatment of diction, to have it be really clear, to try to have it be very clear, but to not have it overdone, to not sound like you had a diction class at Yale, for example. You don't want to bring attention to what you're doing vocally or with the text as much as just letting it be received very easily.
Am I wrong that when you hear singers from the middle of the 20th century
Mhm.
and people reciting lines in movies,
Yes.
that it is more formalized
Yeah.
and a little proper diction, and that has changed?
That has changed, and that is changing. Interestingly, that's sort of a whole other interesting subject, because that's even, I think we're seeing those waves even within classical music, even to the point, and this is a tiny bit extreme, but it's fascinating. We spend years and years and years trying to sound like native speakers of at least 5 or 6 languages when we sing, and now there's even beginning to be at least some openness to the idea of, well, if native English speakers are singing in many languages, why is it necessarily the responsibility to sing it perfectly in that language as much as it is to sing in that language and feel that language? We tend to love when we hear accented English in other singing. So it's just a very interesting
That
discussion.
is a really interesting issue because
Yeah.
say you sing in Spanish, correct?
Sure,
And
of course.
it is so different to hear a native and different Spanish speakers, whether it's
That's-
Barcelonian
that's
or,
right.
or
Absolutely.
Puerto Rican
Yeah.
or Latin American.
Yeah.
But when an English person speaks Spanish, right, sometimes it could come off as stilted if they're trying to be precise. But on the other hand, if you're performing something, do you lose too much? Like, how do you approach it when you sing
Well,
in Spanish?
This is
What's the decision you make?
Well, the question you're asking me is a little bit unusual because I could wear a hat as a professor and think generally about how to answer that question.
Give me both. I want both hats.
Well, as a professor, I would say, because I'm a product of my time. So I am of the old school in that our job is to sing as close to native as possible. That our job is to find flawless, if we can, phonemes in a number of languages in which most of our lyric repertoire is written. So I have to admit that I still believe that's our responsibility. Personally, I grew up with Spanish. So when you ask me that question, I don't have an approach to Spanish that I think about technically.
Well, you were in
as a
Caracas,
singer.
right? So your Spanish might be different, and Miami. So your
Well,
Spanish is different from some other people's, right?
Sure it is.
I mean, everybody's is.
So just frankly, Paul, a lot like my English, my spoken Spanish is a little bit standard madrileño,
Mhm.
and I don't use the theta if I'm singing Spanish from Central or South America, but I also am going to use my S's and final consonants if I'm singing an Argentinian composer. So I do sort of sing my Spanish, but make some adjustments.
I'm wondering if your professor hat sort of looks at what the rules are,
Yes, of course.
and that your performer hat knows the rules. And like any great artist, you have to learn the rules first before you amend them.
That is absolutely true.
But then it's pretty important to amend them to make them your own, right? As long as you understand why they're there.
Yes, I will diffuse, amend with live, breathe, let it evolve.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And all art evolves.
Exactly.
And that if we but we still kind of need to know what the rules are and where it came from.
There's
if we
no
wanna
question of that. And
help it evolve.
And again, my students will tell you, I do get very excited about the rules
Yeah.
in class, because it's wonderful to discover and have the structure. And frankly, I think many of us have this experience, is that we know the rules better in our subsequent languages.
Uh-huh.
And it also sheds light on the language one's mother
Is that
tongue.
because we learned it in a more formal setting than when we learn our first language in the house when people are talking?
Well, we learn it backwards, really. We learn top down when the way we learn language is bottom up. So,
and as language evolves, you always think at what point has the rule changed?
Sure.
And at what point are you holding on to a rule so we can all understand each other?
And that's where the conversation is interesting regarding lyric diction, is how that's evolving in what I call the living languages. What are we really doing? What kind of relic are we preserving if we're so interested in older rules? If we're not respecting a living language, then
and that those rules were once formed as part of a living language.
That's right.
So now bringing it back to how you perform the cabaret song,
Yeah.
not just diction, but also how long you hold a note and
Yeah.
how dramatic you make it.
Yeah.
So when you're making the pivot to cabaret, I still heard a classical voice in that,
Sure.
but I didn't hear a classical composition.
Good.
So what's going through your mind in balancing those when you record that?
I'm
sing
trying
it?
to really respond to what Dominic has written. I'm trying to think like a chamber musician and to hear what he's written, to listen to JJ and have my voice be a part of that texture in a way that somehow, quote unquote, makes sense to me.
Uh-huh. And we're talking about a new album called A Few Words About Chekhov on Bridge Recordings. It's sung by Adriana Zabala with three members of the accompaniment, Jesse Bloomberg on baritone, Martin Katz on piano, too, accompaniment.
Yes.
And it's the songs of Darwin and Gento. And except for the thing we just heard, which is the last cabaret songs, it's 3 song cycles, right? Of Chekhov.
Yes, it's so the biggest cycle on the album is Chekhov. The rest are not.
Oh, wait.
Yes.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's all right. That's
few
okay.
words. So we're going to go back now to the beginning, back to 2008.
Yeah.
Well, not the beginning of time.
Yeah, we're not going back to the beginning.
We're
of time.
doing Deep in the Heart of the Lake. Oh, by Alan
So the
Lewis.
poet is Alan Lewis.
Okay, so tell me about that.
So this is also, thank you, those of you who are listening for your openness, because this is also an unusual piece. So we're starting with 2 kind of outliers. The first one in that it wasn't in Dominic's typical style and a little bit outside the realm of typically classical composition. This one is more in the realm of classical composition, but it's unusual in that it is written for solo voice, period.
Oh, no accompaniment.
No accompaniment.
Okay.
So a cappella, no piano, which now you'll also hear if you were to sing the song that we just heard a cappella, which if you'd heard it a few times, you may hum it in your kitchen. And that does happen with tunes that are written in a more popular vein. The one that we're going to play for you next is very unlikely that you would be humming it. It's rather it's tonal but complex.
Uh-huh.
The harmonic structure is complex, and it's very challenging to learn and
how does a
perform.
solo voice do harmonic structure? You're not harmonizing.
Yeah, that's a great
Are you
question.
imagining the theme and then you're putting the harmony on it?
That's a wonderful question. Because I'm not a kiddo, as we established before we started, I've been doing this a very long time. And it's interesting. I love that question because when I was learning this piece, I don't think I thought of how I was thinking of harmony, other than to say that in order to make sense of the melody in the phrases, I would take a phrase at a time and absolutely understand what the underlying harmony was. So almost the way you would if you were jazz improvising and you would go to the bass line to understand a harmonic, a vertical structure. Yes, I think you can do that with this piece, which is to say, if I sang a phrase, I could go to the piano and I could roll a chord or two that would underlie that melody.
And how does that affect your singing?
Well, it's extremely important because what I would call it feeds the ear brain. I call it the ear brain. So my ear brain has to make sense of this melody in order to do it well with how challenging you'll hear that it is, and that you have nothing but your ear and your voice to rely on.
And
to
when
do it
Dominic
properly.
Argento writes it for solo voice,
Yes.
does he write the chords or does he just do single notes?
I cannot imagine that he did not think harmonically. It's impossible.
What
to
was
imagine.
bequeathed to you when you learned it? What did you learn it from?
From the score with only the vocal line,
All right,
which
so
is unusual for us.
now I cannot wait to hear this. Okay.
Well, and let me also say the poem is very, very beautiful. And
What's it about?
so it's not
Deep in the heart
dissimilar
of the
to
lake.
what we were talking about before. And I'm just going to bring up, I'll sort of summarize and bring up one line. I think the point of the poem is, despite complexity and depth and even scariness in life, to not fear and to not rush. And it's all okay. And everyone goes through those things. And it doesn't mean that there's a sunny ending. It means that you're human. The depth of the heart of the lake is the depth of your heart. It's endless, and it can be scary and dark, but all things pass. You will too, and it's all okay.
And the lake's still there. Not a bad message for our times at the moment.
No, it's not.
All right, let's finally stop talking and start listening to Deep in the Heart of the Lake from Adriana Zabala's new album of Dominic Argento's music.
Deep is the heart of the lake, where the last light is clinging. A strange foreboding voice is patiently singing. Do not fear to venture where the last light trembles, because you were in love never dissembles. Fear not more the boast, the bully, the lies, the vain labor. Make no show for death as for a rich neighbor. What stays of the great religions? An old priest, an old birth. What stays of the great battles? Dust on earth. Cold is the lake water, and dark as history. Hurry not and fear not this oldest mystery. This strange voice singing, the slow deep drag of the lake, this yearning, this ending of the heart, and its
Deep in the Heart of the Lake, the words of Alan Lewis, Alan Lewis, and Dominic Argento's music, sung on a new CD featuring Adriana Zabala, New Haven's own international operatic and concert soloist. It's an album put out by Bridge, and we're talking about here on Dateline New Haven and WNHH FM. So how'd you learn to sing out of that? Like that?
Lots of practice.
I mean, when you were a kid growing up, did you want to? You've lived a lot of places growing up,
I
right?
did live a lot of places.
Where you started out in Georgia.
Yeah, I was born in Georgia as a baby, and my trajectory was Miami, and then Venezuela in Caracas, and then Texas, south of Houston, and then since that time, I've lived in a couple of countries in about 11
And why
US
were you
states.
moving around so much as a kid?
As a kid, it was really just two big moves.
Mhm.
But they were major, I think, to go from Miami to Caracas and then
Were your
Caracas
parents
to
in
Texas.
music?
No, not professionally. My parents were educators, but they loved music. And some of my earliest memories, and I think that was really, really formative, was sitting on the floor of our home in Miami when I was maybe 3 or 4 years old and picking up, as we were talking about earlier, the albums, pulling the albums out, looking at all the covers. And I still remember them to this day. Feel like this morning I could have been that little kid, almost a toddler, and looking at Tijuana Brass, Bach, Simon and Garfunkel, Commodores.
Was it switched on Bach at that point?
No. They had, some good legit recordings of, just some classical music, but it was everything. They loved everything. And they were in a choral society, and my mother played recorder, like Baroque recorder in a Baroque ensemble. So there was a lot of music, even though nobody pursued it professionally.
And at what point was this in your brain that this is my thing?
At age 12,
Okay.
on a Wednesday night.
Okay.
After
so
my
specific.
mother took me to see Amadeus.
Oh.
And it 100% changed my life.
Did you know right then?
She could not get me out of the seat during the credits. And I think I was just, planning the next 70 years.
Wow. And how did you develop? How did you become a?
Every step has led to the next. So I'm joking about a plan. It's never been a big plan. It's still not a big plan. Even at that time, it seemed that the only thing that mattered, and it really is still what drives me, is what's in front of me, is to constantly discover, to constantly do, to constantly pursue new pieces, new ideas, collaboration. So, of course, at that time, between the ages of 12 and 25, it's also about education. So I was really heavily pursuing. I was a percussionist, and I was in band and in choir. It was pursuing music theory, really learning how to be, learning much more on the piano, learning harmony and theory and the history of music. And then, of course, undergrad and graduate school and lots of time overseas studying languages like crazy, which I still do.
And which are the prime languages? Spanish, Italian,
French, German,
Mm-hmm.
and English. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I venture into others, but I don't claim to. The ones that we mentioned, I feel a deep responsibility to. The others, I just kind of hope for the best and do my best.
And you found your dream. You're to pursue it, and you've had over 50 operatic roles.
Yes.
What's the one that sticks out the most in your mind?
Well, in recent years, I've gotten to do a lot of new works, which has just been tremendous. But I will say that the one character I've played more than any other is from the very established repertoire, and that is Mozart. So it's Cherubino in The Marriage of Figaro. I probably bowed in a show probably more than 100 times playing that role. So it's one not only that I know extremely well, it's very much still in my body.
What happens when you're in that role? What are you feeling on stage? What is going through your mind?
Total flow, as they say, but alignment, just feel the right. I say to my students sometimes when they really sing something that really, really suits them, I say, boy, you're so, that forêt is so good for you, and you're so good for that forêt.
And do you feel something different from when you've rehearsed it, when you're on stage playing that role and singing? What feels different?
The magic ingredients of the audience, the live orchestra, the energy, the colleagues on stage, the powerful and hilarious and touching and meaningful story of Beaumarchais as adapted by Da Ponte in Italian, the never tiring gorgeousness and cleverness of Mozart's.
And do you feel like you're at a destination? Like, is it one of those moments when you feel like you've arrived somewhere, there's not somewhere else you need to be?
Oh, that's such a lovely question. I would say I'm a very, very restless person, and what you just described is something I've felt so seldom in my life that I can probably remember only a handful of those times, a couple of which were giving birth to my unbelievable daughters. There's absolutely nothing else on your mind. And that's one of the most
beautiful things. With a little
things.
assist from intense pain, right?
Well, sure. It does focus the mind.
There's an intensity of performing, too. It's not necessarily pain, but you don't have a choice of being distracted.
No,
right?
That's exactly right. It does focus the mind in an exhilarating way.
So have you had that moment on stage where you feel like you're at the destination?
Yes, I have.
But not every time you sing,
Absolutely,
right?
Not even close to every time. That doesn't mean that that's not fulfillment and flexibility and happiness and excitement or inspiration. But what you describe, for me, is very rare. And I've definitely experienced it. And boy, you know when it's happening.
Well,
but
lovely.
it's not often.
So before I let you go, we're going to hear one more. Finally going to get the Chekhov.
Yeah.
Written in 1996 by Dominic Argento.
Yes.
And you were suggesting you play the track. There's a lot of tracks here. And the album is a few words about Chekhov's songs and cycles of Dominic Argento. A new a new album released by Bridge featuring Adriana Zabala of New Haven, who's here with us right now, and of the world. Mm-hmm. And this is, tell us about this track. This is Il Sole, Olga. So
one of the really, among the innumerable cool things about Dominic is that I mentioned that he had this really broad-minded and ecumenical interest in literature. So he was always choosing really interesting poetry and interesting subject matter. But one of the things that was especially compelling to him was the epistolary or, letters or journals of great writers. So he was more interested in setting their personal words than he was in necessarily amplifying their stories or the things that they created as artists themselves. And this is a great example. He, in a few words about Chekhov, he is not treating in any way whatsoever any work of Chekhov's. Mm. These are the diaries of Chekhov's wife Olga Knipper and Chekhov himself. So the cycle is for baritone and mezzo. The baritone essentially inhabits the role of Chekhov. The mezzo inhabits the role of Olga Knipper. And
so you're Olga.
I'm Olga. And in this song, the second of the cycle, she's describing that once they met and fell in love, that they indeed got married. But then she really goes very evocatively and listen to how Dominic treats the text. Listen to his harmony and what he does with the text. There's a moment in this setting which is my favorite in the entire cycle. And I will say what it is. But she's describing their life. And he's a famous playwright, and she's an actress, and Chekhov is getting sick. And she describes that they're constantly on the move. They're always saying goodbye to each other. They're always reuniting and then going in different directions. And in the meantime, she's very concerned about his health. And she has this moment where Dominic pauses her words to have this, I think of it as almost a parenthetical moment of where she says, despite anything, all the demands in his career and his illness, there was something so extraordinary that he did, which was his gardening. The way what you just described, maybe it was the state of flow for Chekhov, is that when he was churning the earth.
There's nowhere else he needed to be.
Turning that earth into a luxuriant garden, that it was timeless and that he wasn't sick.
And it sounds like as the composer, Argento is making choices with rests and pauses and pacing.
And harmony. And melody.
About what to emphasize.
Absolutely.
So the gardening stuck out, whereas in the letter it might not have, and it was originally written as a text.
That's exactly right. Is that Dominic would look at that letter and eventually, or on the spot, think, oh, that really means something, or that's something to really treat in what I call nourishment from another dimension. That line can use some musical nourishment.
So when Argento does that, how does that translate to how you then sing it?
Well, again, there is no science to this. That really is, do you have an affinity with what a composer tries to say? And it is indescribable, and it can't be decided.
And you were aware of his intentions. You didn't, because he's
Yeah.
molding and emphasizing from the text.
Yes.
Often a singer
Yeah.
molds and emphasizes from the text of the music.
Yes.
Did you do that, or is this more of a faithful to how he saw it?
It's such a beautiful question, and I can't answer it exactly. But what I can say to that point is, and I think I described this in my program notes, is that one of the things that struck me about this cycle, which is why this huge labor of love exists, is because I felt that Dominic pulled off something pretty extraordinary, which was that in treating this text, at the very same time, all simultaneous, he allows, if one is open to it or hears it, he allows you, the listener, to understand something about Dominic's idea of love and yearning and fulfillment, of Olga's idea, of Anton Chekhov's idea. And I can say, as a very fortunate interpreter of this music, you actually get to feel your own feeling of those things. That's how generous.
And what is your idea?
Well, it seems to be very similar to Dominic's, and that is not unlike the poem in Deep is the Heart of the Lake. That life is so complex and so rich, so full of almost intolerable beauty. Like sometimes it's so beautiful,
It's painful.
It's painful, and that it is also straight up painful. And that all we can do is be together and go through all of that and do it with open hearts and eyes and cry when it's beautiful and cry when it's painful.
Well, that's beautiful, Adriana. Now we're going to hear what that sounds like. Il Solo, Olga.
And
from
this is with Martin Katz on piano.
On the 25th of May, we were married. From then on, we were constantly parting, always seeing each other off, always having to say goodbye. Though his heart was drawn to Moscow, for his health he had to live in Yalta. His warm Siberia, he called it. Through his efforts and great love for everything the earth brings forth, he transformed a wilderness into a luxuriant, exquisite, varied Still, he always yearned to be in Moscow, to be near the theater among actors, to talk, to joke, to be near life, to watch it, feel it, take part in it. Even so, he took a simple, wise and beautiful attitude to his bodily dissolution, saying, "It is because God has put the sailors into me." It's the devil.
You were just listening to solo of Olga from A Few Words About Chekhov, Songs and Cycles of Dominic Argento, a new CD, streaming, however you get your music from Bridge. Just put it out. It features New Haven's own Adriana Zabala. Is beautiful. And your singing is beautiful. And
Thank you.
I have loved so much hearing your story and hearing about the new album. So good luck with it.
Thank you.
What's
good
next?
to be here. What's next? Some Brahms, a brand new work at Yale, a big new work based on Hermann Hesse's Siddhartha novel.
Oh my gosh.
Yes, all kinds of stuff. Good stuff. Yeah.
All right.
Thank you.
Keep plugging.
Thank you so much,
To
Paul.
the river and beyond. Thanks for joining us. Thanks to Harry Drost behind the controls as usual. We're going to take it out with the Afro-Semitic Experience performing I Wish I Knew How It Would Feel to Be Free from the group CD A Plea for Peace. This is Paul Bass inviting you to fly free with us all day and all night long on WNHH, New Haven's home for community radio.